Snow fell relentlessly, blanketing the world in white. But inside an abandoned cabin, veteran Mac Callahan and his dog, Rex, were about to discover that not all darkness can be hidden. What Rex sniffed out in the fireplace wasn't cold ashes, but the silent echo of a lost child, a discovery that would turn an ordinary day into an FBI manhunt. The small, tattered ragdoll lay in Mac's gloved hand, its worn fabric a stark contrast to the pristine snow outside. A faint, cloying sweetness, like burnt sugar or overripe fruit, clung to it, a scent Rex had identified with an almost frantic urgency. Mac stared at the Braille diary, his fingers tracing the raised dots he couldn't comprehend, then at the child's sunglasses, small enough to fit a doll. The cabin's silence, once merely cold, now felt heavy, pregnant with a forgotten terror. Rex let out a low whine, nudging Mac's leg, then sniffed the air around the fireplace again, his nose twitching. The sweet scent, now more potent, seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. It wasn't just a toy, it was a ghost, the whisper of a life forcibly confined. Mac pulled out his satellite phone, the cold metal biting his ear as he dialed the regional task force's emergency number. The wind outside howled, a lament that seemed to echo the silent plea etched into the Braille pages. "We have a problem," Mac said, his voice raspy, cutting through the wind that whistled through the door's crevice. He described the cabin, its remote location, and the disturbing discovery. The operator, trained for calm amidst chaos, noted every word, Mac's urgency unmistakable. Minutes dragged like hours. The distant thrum of a helicopter broke the forest's stillness, growing in volume until it became a metallic roar in the grey sky. Mac stepped out of the cabin, Rex by his side, watching the Border Patrol aircraft, adapted for search and rescue missions, descend slowly over the clearing. Snow whipped around as the blades spun, kicking up a white curtain. Two FBI agents, clad in heavy coats and with serious faces, disembarked, followed by a forensic technician. "Agent Miller, FBI," the taller man said, extending a hand. His eyes swept over Mac, Rex, and the dilapidated cabin with an assessing intensity. "You're veteran Callahan?" Mac nodded, gesturing toward the cabin. "Yes. The discovery is inside. Braille diary, child's glasses, a rag doll, and a scent. Rex found it." Miller and his partner, Agent Ramirez, entered the cabin, their heavy footsteps crunching the ice on the floor. The forensic technician, carrying an equipment case, began setting up his kit. The air inside the cabin filled with a new kind of tension, the chill of abandonment replaced by the gravity of a criminal investigation. "Mr. Callahan, can you explain exactly how you and your dog made this discovery?" Miller asked, his voice calm but with unquestionable authority. Mac recounted his routine patrol, Rex's insistent sniffing at the fireplace, the doll, and the revelation of the secret compartment. He described the sweet scent, which still lingered in the air, though more subtle now. Rex, sensing the change in atmosphere, stayed close to Mac, his eyes watchful of the agents. Ramirez examined the diary with gloved hands, her lips tight. "A Braille diary. That's unusual. A blind child." She looked at the compartment in the fireplace, then at the doll. "And the scent. You said it was sweet?" "Yes," Mac confirmed. Rex reacted to it immediately. It strong on the doll, and it seemed to come from the fireplace. The forensic technician was already collecting samples, dusting for prints, taking photos. The cabin, once a silent relic of time, was now a meticulously examined crime scene. Miller, phone to his ear, spoke in a low voice, his expression hardening. "We have a missing child. Sarah Jenkins, 7 years old, blind, disappeared 3 months ago from a camp about 60 miles from here," Miller announced, hanging up the phone. "The description matches. This isn't just a discovery, Callahan. It's a vital lead." The news hit Mac like a punch. 3 months, a blind child held captive in the depths of a merciless forest. The race against time he had sensed now materialized into a palpable urgency. The diary, which he couldn't read, told a story of silent desperation. The sweet scent which Rex had tracked was now the only hope of finding Sarah. Mac looked at Rex, who gazed back with an intensity that said, "It's not over yet." "What do we do now?" Mac asked, his voice firm. Like a veteran who knew the mission had only just begun, Miller looked at him, then at Rex. "We'll set up a perimeter. The forensic technician will process everything here, but time is critical. If Sarah was here, she's not anymore. We need to find out where she was taken, and your dog Callahan might be our best chance." The snowstorm continued to fall outside, but inside the cabin, a new storm was brewing, one of determination and hope, fueled by a dog's keen sense of smell and a man's courage. The hunt had begun. "Mr. Callahan," Miller said, his voice cutting through the frigid air with quiet authority, "we're going to process this crime scene, but time is our enemy. 3 months is a long time for a child to survive in these conditions, especially a blind one. What Rex found here is our only direct link." He gestured to the rag doll, now carefully placed in an evidence bag. "The scent. Can your dog track it?" Mac looked at Rex, who already seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. The dog rested his head on Mac's hand, a low whine in his throat. "He can. He never fails. But the snow." Mac paused, looking at the window where the flakes danced in spirals. "Snow is a blanket. It muffles scents, rewrites the landscape." "I understand," Miller nodded, "but it's all we have. The forensic technician will try to isolate the scent compound, but that takes time. Time Sarah Jenkins doesn't have. We need Rex to start now. Where does the scent lead?" Ramirez approached with a clear evidence bag, holding the rag doll. "The scent is distinct, sweet, almost fruity, but with an underlying note I can't identify. It's strong on the doll." Mac took the doll, allowing Rex to sniff it deeply. The dog inhaled the worn fabric, his body tense, the muscles in his forelegs trembling. A low, urgent growl escaped his throat. Rex raised his head, sniffing the air toward the cabin door, his eyes fixed. He's got it," Mac stated, his voice grave. "The scent leads outside." The FBI team hurried to prepare. Miller and Ramirez, along with Mac and Rex, would be the initial tracking team. Other agents began setting up a wider search perimeter, using GPS to map the area. The helicopter, now hovering at a higher altitude to conserve fuel, would provide air support if visibility allowed. Outside, the snow was falling more softly now, but the wind continued to blow, sweeping through the trees and kicking up clouds of white powder. The cold bit at their skin and visibility was reduced. Rex, however, didn't hesitate. With his nose to the ground, he began to move, following a trail invisible to human eyes. He circled the cabin once, sniffing every crevice and snowdrift, until his body leaned firmly northward into the densest part of the forest. "He's tracking something," Mac said, his eyes fixed on Rex. The dog moved with silent determination, his tail low but steady. Miller and Ramirez followed closely, their steps careful in the fresh snow. The forest silence was broken only by the crunch of snow under heavy boots and the rustle of wind in the treetops. Every step was a gamble, every meter covered a tenuous hope. Rex stopped abruptly, nose in the air. He let out a short bark, pointing toward a cluster of snow-covered bushes. Mac approached, and Rex began scratching at the snow with his paws, revealing a piece of colorful fabric caught on a branch. It was a small child's silk scarf with a faded butterfly pattern. The sweet scent, though faint, still clung to it. Ramirez carefully picked up the scarf with gloved hands. "It's hers," she murmured, her voice tense. "Sarah Jenkins was last seen with a scarf like this." The discovery reignited the urgency. Sarah had been here, and she had left a clue. The trail wasn't completely lost. Rex, validated, continued his search, now with renewed energy. He plunged deeper into the forest, each step taking them further from the cabin and closer to the truth, or perhaps to an even greater danger. The terrain began to steepen, the snow grew deeper. Ancient trees, cloaked in white, cast long, distorted shadows. Mac felt the weight of the mission on his shoulders. A blind child alone for 3 months, the image of the Braille diary, the raised dots telling a story he couldn't read but could feel, spurred him onward. Rex stopped again, this time near a moss-covered, snowy rock. He sniffed intensely, then looked at Mac with a gaze that said, "The scent changes here." The trail seemed to split or grow weaker, as if something had been used to mask the escape. "What is it, boy?" Mac asked, kneeling beside Rex. The dog growled softly, pointing to the base of the rock where the snow seemed slightly disturbed, but without clear footprints. Miller and Ramirez approached, their eyes sweeping the area. "It looks like something was used here," Miller observed, crouching down. "Perhaps a vehicle, but the snow has covered everything." The race against time had become a battle against the elements and the cunning of an unseen predator. The sweet scent, Rex's only compass, now seemed challenged. Mac knew that every second was precious and that their next move could be the difference between Sarah's life and death. Rex's low growl at the base of the rock was a clear warning. The snow around the stone, though disturbed, revealed no obvious tracks, only the suggestion of an interruption in the invisible trail the dog followed. The wind howled through the trees, scattering snowflakes and making Rex's task even harder. "What have we got, boy?" Mac asked, kneeling beside Rex, his hand resting on the dog's thick fur. Rex sniffed the air, then the ground, with contained frustration. His brown eyes met Mac's, communicating the difficulty. The sweet scent was there, but mixed, diluted, as if it had been dragged by something large and heavy that then disappeared. Miller and Ramirez examined the snow. "There are no clear tire tracks," Miller said, his sharp gaze sweeping the area. "But the snow is compacted in a way that suggests a vehicle, perhaps an ATV or a snowmobile. Something that wouldn't leave as obvious a trail as a car." "They moved her," Ramirez completed, her voice tense. "They either left her here or picked her up from here and then drove her away. That means they have a support network. It's not a lone wolf." The implication weighed heavily on Mac, an organization with multiple locations and means of transport. This made the hunt exponentially more difficult, but Rex wouldn't give up. The dog began to circle the rock, nose to the ground, ignoring the snow that tried to cover the traces. He sniffed every small stone, every branch, every breath of wind, determined to unravel the puzzle. Suddenly, Rex stopped. His body stiffened and a sharp but controlled bark escaped his throat. He scratched at the snow near a small thorny bush, revealing a piece of dark, shiny plastic the size of a thumb. Ramirez quickly approached, picking up the object with gloved hands. "It's a piece of a headlight," she murmured, examining it under the dim light. "Looks like it's from an all-terrain vehicle. The color indicates an older model, perhaps." "That confirms the vehicle," Miller said, his voice taking on a more urgent tone. "And if they were in a hurry, they might have hit something, leaving this evidence behind." Rex, as if validated, continued his search. He no longer focused on the rock, but followed a faint line that stretched eastward through a dense cluster of pine trees. The sweet scent was almost imperceptible to humans now, but to Rex, it was a faint but persistent melody. He was following what appeared to be a trail of someone who had exited the vehicle, perhaps to check the path or to transfer Sarah to another transport. The forest grew denser, the trees tighter, forming a labyrinth of snow-covered trunks and branches. The crunch of snow under Max and the agent's boots was the only sound, besides the wind and their ragged breaths. Visibility diminished as daylight began to fade and concern about time intensified. Rex stopped again, this time in a small natural clearing where the snow was thinner. He sniffed the ground intensely, then raised his head and let out a low whine. His eyes fixed on a small indentation in the earth, almost imperceptible beneath the layer of snow. Mac knelt and with gloved hands removed the snow. Beneath it, there was a small area of compacted earth, and in the center, a tiny gleaming object. It was a coat button, a vibrant blue with a star design. It was clearly a child's. Ramirez picked up the button with gloved hands, her lips tightening. Sarah Jenkins was wearing a blue coat with star buttons when she disappeared. This is hers. The discovery of the button rekindled the flame of hope, but also terrified Mac. Sarah had been there, and the button was proof of her most recent presence. But why would she lose it? Was it in a struggle, or did it simply fall? The image of a blind child, alone in the forest, fighting to survive, squeezed Mac's heart. The trail continues that way, Mac said, pointing in the direction Rex was already sniffing. The dog, with renewed energy, was moving toward a small hill where the forest opened up to rockier terrain. The scent, though still faint, now seemed to have a more defined direction. Miller communicated with command via radio, reporting the new evidence and the tracking direction. The agent's voice was calm, but the tension was palpable. We need more teams to sweep this area, and we need a search helicopter with thermal vision as soon as visibility allows. Darkness began to envelop the forest, transforming shadows into ghostly figures. The cold intensified, and the promise of a long, dangerous night hung in the air. Mac knew that time was running out quickly. Every step Rex took was a step toward Sarah, but also a step into unknown and potentially more dangerous territory. The hunt had become a race against time, darkness, and the elements, with a child's life hanging by a thread. Darkness descended upon the forest like a heavy shroud, transforming the tree shadows into ghostly figures that stretched and writhed with the wind. The icy air bit at their skin, and with each step uphill, the snow became more treacherous, hiding loose rocks and exposed roots. Rex, however, didn't falter. With his nose to the ground, he led the way up the rocky hill, his muscles tense and focused. The sound of his sniffs was audible, a rapid, determined puff mixed with the crunch of snow under Max, Miller's and Ramirez's heavy boots. "Visibility is dropping fast," Miller announced, his voice slightly muffled by his hood. He adjusted his headlamp, which cast a pale, unsteady beam ahead. "The helicopter won't be able to give us air support for much longer." Mac nodded, his eyes fixed on Rex. The dog was the only reliable compass in that white and dark labyrinth. Sarah's sweet scent, though incredibly faint to human senses, was a clear trail for Rex, a tenuous promise of life. With every meter they ascended, the forest grew denser, the pines pressing in like silent guardians, their snow-laden branches swaying gently in the wind. The terrain became more rugged. Large rocks covered in moss and ice formed small ravines and narrow passages. Rex stopped abruptly in one of these passages, a low guttural growl escaping his throat. He wasn't sniffing the ground, but the air, his eyes fixed on a dark crevice between two giant rocks. A different scent, stronger and more pungent, mingled with Sarah's sweet trail. "What is it, boy?" Mac whispered, crouching beside the dog. Rex took a step back, then let out a short, sharp bark, pointing his muzzle toward the crevice. Miller and Ramirez approached, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Smell of smoke," Miller murmured, sniffing the air, "and something else, metallic." With caution, Mac approached the crevice, rifle in hand. The cold air emanating from the opening carried not only the smell of smoke, but also a chemical odor, almost like burnt oil. Rex, with his keen senses, kept a respectful distance, but his body trembled with contained urgency. "Looks like a cave," Ramirez said, pointing her flashlight inside. The beam of light revealed a small entrance, which opened into a deeper darkness. The floor was covered with loose stones and some dry branches. "Stay here, Rex," Mac ordered, his voice firm. "Miller, Ramirez with me." The three moved into the cave, their flashlights dancing over the damp walls. The chemical scent intensified, mixed with a faint smell of mold. The cave wasn't deep, opening into a single irregular chamber. In the center there was an extinguished campfire, its ashes cold and dark. Beside the fire, a pile of dirty blankets and some empty food cans lay scattered. "They've been here," Ramirez said, her voice echoing slightly in the cave. She picked up one of the empty cans. "Simple canned food. And these blankets. They're old, but recently used." Miller examined the campfire ashes. No residual heat. They left a few hours ago, perhaps. But the scent is still strong. He pointed to a dark stain on the ground, near the fire. "Looks like motor oil. And here, a small piece of burnt rubber." Mac felt a tightening in his chest. The cave was a temporary hideout, a stopping point. Sarah had been there, but the sweet scent was now overlaid by evidence of the kidnappers. This meant they were closer, but also that the predators were cunning and well-equipped. His eyes swept the cave, searching for any sign that would lead them forward. In a corner, half hidden beneath an overhanging rock, he saw something. It was a small piece of paper, folded and crumpled, with something written on it. With gloved hands, Mac picked up the paper. It was a child's drawing made with crayons. A bright yellow sun, a simple house, and a human figure with a large, clumsy smile. On the back, scrawled in shaky braille, was a single word: "Help." Ramirez let out a muffled gasp. "It's hers, the drawing and the braille. It's Sarah." Mac's heart pounded. She wasn't just being taken, she was fighting, leaving clues, calling for help. The determination in his eyes hardened. Sarah was alive, and she was with them. "Her trail continues," Mac stated, his voice hoarse. "She left this for us. She wants to be found." They exited the cave, and Rex, seeing the drawing, let out a low whine, sniffing the paper in Mac's hands. The dog then looked into the forest's darkness beyond the cave, toward a trail that climbed even further up the hill, toward a rocky summit. Sarah's scent, though mixed with that of the kidnappers, now seemed to carry new meaning, a new urgency. "They're heading for the summit," Miller said, pointing to the hilltop, where the silhouette of some trees stood out against the night sky. "Probably to get a view of the area, or to meet someone." Mac looked at Rex, who was already moving, his body leaning forward, following the invisible trail. The darkness was almost total now, and the cold was becoming unbearable. The discovery in the cave had confirmed that Sarah was alive and aware of her situation, but also that the kidnappers were on the move, perhaps preparing for a new escape. The race against time had turned into a relentless pursuit, with Mac and Rex determined not to let Sarah vanish into the night. The ascent to the rocky summit was a battle against darkness and the biting cold. The wind howled, whipping exposed faces and kicking up clouds of fine snow that stung their skin. Every step was an effort, boots slipping on ice-covered rocks and treacherous snow. Rex, however, seemed immune to fatigue, his muscular body moving with surprising agility. He climbed ahead, his nose working incessantly, inhaling the frigid air, deciphering the complex tapestry of scents the forest offered. The sound of Mac's and the agent's ragged breaths was loud in their ears, mixed with the rustle of coats and the occasional snap of a broken branch underfoot. The flashlights, once pale beams, now seemed mere pinpricks of light, battling the absolute darkness that swallowed the world around them. Shadows danced and writhed, transforming every tree and rock into a menacing figure. "The cold is becoming unbearable," Ramirez murmured, her voice hoarse as she adjusted her hood closer to her face. "I don't know how much longer we can keep this pace." Miller nodded, his teeth clenched. "Sarah is the priority. We have to keep going. The kidnappers won't have had time to warm up properly either." Mac said nothing, his eyes fixed on Rex's dark silhouette. The dog was the embodiment of hope, a beacon of determination on that starless night. Sarah's scent, though faint and mixed, was a persistent melody for Rex, a promise that the girl was near, perhaps closer than they imagined. As they neared the top, the vegetation thinned, giving way to more exposed terrain, dominated by large rock formations and twisted pines, their branches like dark claws scratching at the sky. The wind intensified, whistling through the rock crevices, creating a ghostly chorus. Rex stopped abruptly at the summit, his ears perked, body tense. He wasn't sniffing the ground, but the air, his eyes fixed on the vast darkness that stretched below. A low, contained growl escaped his throat, an alert sound that made Mac's heart pound. "What is it, boy?" Mac whispered, crouching beside Rex, rifle ready. The dog let out a short, urgent bark, pointing his muzzle in a specific direction. Mac followed Rex's gaze and, through the darkness, noticed a faint, almost imperceptible glow that flickered and vanished at irregular intervals. It wasn't a star or a plane. It was an artificial light, distant but unmistakable. "A light," Miller said, his voice tense as Ramirez pointed her flashlight in the same direction. "It seems to be coming from a structure, perhaps a cabin or a camp." The scent Rex was picking up was now more complex. Sarah's sweet aroma was still there, but it mingled with the pungent smell of wood smoke and, more distinctly, a heavy metallic odor, almost like diesel or gasoline. "They're there," Mac stated, his voice hoarse, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The sight of the light ignited a new flame of urgency. "That's where they're heading, or where they already are." Rex, as if confirming, began to descend the other side of the summit, following a steep rocky trail. The descent was even more dangerous than the climb, with snow hiding holes and loose rocks. The agents moved with caution, their flashlights dancing over the treacherous terrain, while the distant light grew a little clearer, a sinister beacon in the darkness. The sound of an engine, faint at first, began to reach Mac's ears. It wasn't the sound of an ordinary car, but something heavier, more robust. A diesel engine, perhaps from a generator or a large all-terrain vehicle. The sound was intermittent, as if being switched on and off, or as if idling. "I'm hearing an engine," Ramirez said, her eyes wide. "Sounds like a generator or maybe a truck." Miller activated his radio, his voice low but firm. "Command, we're at the summit. We have visual of a light and audio of an engine. There appears to be a structure or camp in the valley below. We're descending. We need support and a containment team ready to move in." The wind brought a new scent, stronger now, mingling with the others, the smell of food cooking. It was a simple aroma, perhaps of soup or stew, but it was an undeniable sign of human presence, and Sarah's sweet scent was stronger than ever, almost overpowering the others. Mac felt a mix of hope and dread. They were incredibly close. Sarah was there, alive, perhaps inside that structure, but the kidnappers were too. The pursuit was about to end, but the most dangerous part of the mission was just beginning. They descended the slope, shadows lengthening and writhing around them, while the sound of the engine and the glow of the light grew more distinct with each step. Mac's heart pounded in his chest. Cold and fatigue forgotten, replaced by intense concentration. Sarah's life was at stake, and they were mere yards away. The descent down the rocky slope was a test of endurance. The snow, once a soft layer, now transformed into a treacherous crust, hiding loose rocks and exposed roots. Every step demanded total concentration, leg muscles burning with the effort. The wind continued to howl, but here, on the slope, it seemed less biting, perhaps muffled by the thickening density of the trees. The sound of the engine, once intermittent, was now constant, a low, persistent rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. It was unmistakable, a diesel generator running at full load. The light had also grown clearer, an orange-yellow glow that pulsed rhythmically through the dark foliage, indicating a considerable power source. Rex, with his feline agility, glided down the slope with surprising grace, his body low and tense. He didn't stop to sniff the ground, but kept his nose raised, eagerly inhaling the air. Sarah's scent was now an overwhelming presence, mingling with the aroma of wood smoke, the diesel from the generator, and the strong, inviting smell of cooking food. It was a rich stew, perhaps with meat and vegetables, an aroma that in other circumstances would have been comforting, but now was a sinister omen. "We're almost there," Miller whispered, his voice hoarse with fatigue, but with a note of renewed urgency. He pointed to a clearing that was beginning to open up below, where the yellow light shone with greater intensity. Mac nodded, his heart beating a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He could feel adrenaline pumping through his veins, drowning out fatigue and cold. Sarah's life was at stake, and they were mere yards away. As they reached the edge of the clearing, the scene revealed itself. It wasn't a cabin, but rather a rudimentary yet well-organized camp. In the center, a campfire crackled cheerfully, its flames dancing and casting long, distorted shadows against the trees. Beside the fire, a large iron cauldron hung from a tripod, from which the stew's aroma emanated. There were two large, heavy canvas tents, skillfully pitched, and an improvised shelter made of logs and tarps, which seemed to serve as a kind of kitchen. The generator rumbled in a corner, partially hidden by a pile of firewood, powering some portable lamps that illuminated the camp's perimeter. They crouched behind a cluster of pines, observing the sight. The snow around the camp was trampled, indicating recent and constant activity. The smell of diesel was strong, and Mac noticed a robust utility vehicle, a modified military jeep, parked near one of the tents, its large wheels and off-road tires covered in mud and snow. "3 individuals," Ramirez whispered, counting the figures moving around the campfire. A burly man with a thick beard stirred the stew with a wooden spoon. Another, thinner and taller, was sharpening a knife near the jeep. The third, a woman with dark, tied-back hair, sat on a log, watching the fire with a bored expression. All appeared armed with visible holsters at their waists. Rex let out a low, almost inaudible whine, his body trembling slightly. His eyes were fixed on the larger tent, the one closest to the jeep. Sarah's sweet scent was overwhelming now, coming from there. Mac gripped his rifle, the laser sight already active, an invisible red dot dancing in the darkness. "She's in that tent," he stated, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Her scent is too strong to be anywhere else." Miller activated his radio again, his voice even lower. "Command, we've confirmed the camp. 3 armed individuals, 1 vehicle. The child is in one of the tents. We are awaiting the containment team. Repeat, the child is in the tent." The wind carried a rough laugh from the bearded man, who offered a plate of stew to the woman. The scene seemed almost normal, a forest camp were it not for the grim context. Mac watched Sarah's tent. There was a small hole in the canvas, and through it a flickering light could be seen. He imagined Sarah inside, alone and terrified, but also brave enough to leave the drawing as a clue. The image of her, blind and vulnerable, ignited a cold fury in his chest. "We can't wait much longer," Mac whispered to Miller and Ramirez. "If they move, we could lose her. We need a plan." Ramirez nodded, her eyes sweeping the camp. "The campfire is a central point, the generator too, if we can disable them." "And the jeep," Miller completed. It's their escape route. We need to immobilize it. Mac felt the urgency of the situation. The containment team would take precious time to arrive and position themselves. Every minute was an eternity for Sarah. He looked at Rex, who was tense, ready for action. The dog knew they were close, that the mission was at its climax. Miller, you and Ramirez keep an eye on the two men. I'll try to approach the tent. Rex will come with me, Mac instructed, his voice firm and full of determination. As soon as backup is in position, we move in. The agents nodded, adjusting their weapons. The night's silence was broken only by the generator's rumble, the crackle of the campfire, and the distant sound of wind in the trees. The tension was palpable, the air charged with the imminent promise of confrontation. Mac knew that the next phase of the mission would be the most dangerous, but also the most crucial. Sarah's life depended on his courage and precision. He braced himself, rifle in hand, and signaled to Rex, who moved silently by his side, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. They were ready for battle. Mac moved with the lightness of a ghost, each step calculated not to disturb the frozen snow crust. Rex, a dark, silent shadow by his side, mirrored his caution, his body low and tense, muzzle pointed at the tent. The diesel generator's rumble was a sonic blanket that, paradoxically, offered both cover and a constant reminder of the enemy's presence. The crackle of the campfire and the low murmur of the kidnappers were the only other sounds that dared to break the icy stillness of the night. Mac felt the cold bite at his cheeks and fingers, but the adrenaline coursing through his veins was a more potent warmth. He crept from pine to pine, using the dense foliage and deep shadows as allies. His eyes, accustomed to the darkness, swept the camp, mapping every movement of the three individuals. The bearded man continued to stir the stew, while the thinner, taller man, with the sharpened knife, now seemed to inspect the jeep, his eyes fixed on the tires. The woman, previously seated, stood and stretched her arms, yawning, before approaching the campfire to warm herself. Sarah's scent was now so strong, Mac could almost feel it on his own skin, a sweet, childlike aroma that mingled with the diesel and smoke. He focused on the tent, searching for any sign of movement, any sound that might come from within. A small hole in the canvas near the base revealed a flickering light, as if someone were using a flashlight or a small lantern. Rex let out an almost imperceptible whine, a sound of pure urgency that only Mac, with his deep connection to the dog, could discern. The German shepherd's eyes were fixed on the tent, his tail stiff, swaying in an almost imperceptible tremor. The dog knew. He felt Sarah's proximity, her vulnerability. "Easy, boy," Mac whispered, his voice so low it barely left his throat. He knew the containment team was still minutes away, perhaps more. Every second felt like an hour. The thought of waiting, of leaving Sarah 1 minute longer in that captivity, was unbearable. Suddenly, the bearded man, who had been focused on the stew, turned and looked directly at Sarah's tent. He said something to the woman, who nodded, and then began walking toward the tent, a steaming plate of stew in his hand. Mac's heart pounded. It was now or never. If that man entered the tent, Sarah could be moved, or worse, used as a shield. There was no time to wait. "Miller, Ramirez, prepare yourselves," Mac transmitted in an urgent whisper over the radio. "The bearded man is heading for the tent. I'm moving. I need to disable the generator and the jeep." He didn't wait for a response. The plan had changed. The urgency of the situation overrode the need to wait for full backup. Mac crouched even lower, rifle ready, and signaled to Rex. The dog moved like a shadow, skirting the pines, as Mac prepared for the riskiest move. The bearded man was mere yards from the tent, his hand already reaching to unzip the canvas. Mac couldn't allow it. He had to act. The generator rumbled loudly, and the jeep was their escape route. Disabling both was crucial. With a swift, decisive movement, Mac launched himself from the cover of the pines, not toward the tent, but on a trajectory that would take him to the generator first. His objective was to create a distraction and cut the camp's power, plunging it into darkness. Rex, anticipating the move, darted ahead, his body low and fast. The bearded man heard the crunch of compacted snow and turned his head, but it was too late. Mac was already in motion, a blur in the darkness, rifle raised. The first target was the generator, the camp's electrical heart. A well-placed shot could silence it and plunge the site into chaos, giving Mac the advantage he needed to reach Sarah. A dry crack ripped through the frigid air, partially muffled by the generator's rumble. Mac's shot hit the diesel engine's control panel with surgical precision. The generator sputtered, let out a final loud roar, and then fell silent, plunging the camp into near-total darkness. The portable lamps flickered and died, and the campfire's flames, once a welcoming light, now seemed pale and insufficient. "FBI, hands up!" Miller's voice echoed through the clearing, cutting through the darkness and sudden silence. Chaos erupted. The bearded man yelled a curse, dropping the plate of stew. The woman and the thin man, caught by surprise, spun around, their hands darting for their weapons. The sound of hurried footsteps and the clink of metal from Ramirez and Miller, now out of cover, approached. Mac, seizing the darkness and confusion, didn't hesitate. His second shot was aimed at the Jeep's front tire, a hollow sound of tearing rubber that sealed their escape route. He dropped to the ground, seeking cover behind a pile of firewood, rifle aimed at the center of the camp. Rex, with a furious bark, was already in action. The dog, guided by Sarah's scent and the instinct to protect, didn't go for the kidnappers, but for the tent. He tore at the canvas with his teeth, creating a larger opening, and slipped inside, a fierce guardian searching for the girl. The kidnapper's shouts mingled with Rex's barks and the FBI agent's orders. The campfire, now the only significant light source, cast dancing, deceptive shadows. Mac could hear the sound of return fire, projectiles whizzing dangerously close. The battle had begun, and Sarah's life was at the eye of the storm. He knew Rex was with her now, but the fight to get her out safely was just beginning. Mac hunkered down behind the pile of firewood, the smell of pine and gunpowder mingling in the frigid air. Projectiles whizzed and cracked against the wood and snow around him, each a shrill reminder of the threat. The bearded man, now without the stew, had thrown himself behind the damaged Jeep, firing erratic bursts with a shotgun. The thin man and the woman, both armed with pistols, sought cover behind the trees, moving with surprising agility for those caught by surprise. "Miller, Ramirez, positions!" Mac shouted, his voice muffled by the gunfire. He fired 3 times in quick succession, forcing the bearded man to duck further. The campfire flames danced, casting long, distorted shadows that made it difficult to distinguish targets in the near-total darkness. The generator's rumble had ceased, leaving only the sound of gunfire and the kidnappers' shouts. "We have one to the east, another to the west," Miller responded, his voice tense, followed by 2 more precise shots. Ramirez, on the other side of the clearing, kept the woman under pressure, her rifle rounds striking the trunk of a tree near her. Inside the tent, Rex was on a different mission. The furious bark he had let out when tearing the canvas transformed into a soft whine as he found Sarah. The girl was huddled in a corner, knees pressed to her chest, the child's sunglasses still on her face, but askew. The sweet scent of fear was palpable, but it mingled with the familiar smell of the rag doll Mac had found. Rex approached slowly, his body low and cautious. Despite the chaos outside, he nuzzled his muzzle against Sarah's outstretched hand, a gentle touch that made her startle. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice trembling, her eyes, blind behind the dark glasses, wide with terror. The sound of gunshots and shouts was deafening to her. Rex let out a low, comforting bark, nudging the rag doll he had brought with him, and that Mac had left with him, into the girl's hand. Sarah felt the familiar fabric, the sweet, unmistakable scent. She recognized the doll, and by extension, the presence that brought it. She fumbled for the dog's face, her fingers finding his soft fur, his pointed ears. "Rex?" she asked, a glimmer of hope in her voice. The dog licked her hand, a clear sign of recognition. Outside, Mac was in a deadly dance. He rose, moved swiftly to new cover and fired again. The thin man cried out in pain as one of Mac's rounds ricocheted off a nearby rock, striking him in the arm. He dropped his weapon, falling to his knees, groaning. "One down!" Mac shouted, his gaze fixed on the two remaining. The bearded man and the woman were now focused on his position, firing furiously. The campfire, almost dying out, offered little light. Suddenly, a distant but unmistakable sound broke through the night. The wail of sirens, followed by the roar of engines, grew rapidly. The FBI containment team was arriving. "Reinforcements are inbound. Surrender now!" Miller bellowed, his voice amplified by the radio he held. The woman hesitated for an instant, her gaze sweeping the darkness. The bearded man, however, seemed determined to fight to the end. He rose from behind the jeep, shotgun aimed at Mac, and fired. The shot whizzed past Mac's head, tearing splinters from the firewood pile. Mac didn't falter. He aimed and squeezed the trigger. The round struck the bearded man's shoulder, who cried out in pain and fell into the snow, the shotgun slipping from his hands. The woman, seeing her two accomplices down, threw her pistol into the snow and raised her hands. "I surrender! I surrender!" she cried, her voice choked with panic. The first FBI vehicles burst into the clearing, their powerful headlights sweeping the darkness and revealing the scene of the confrontation. Armed agents leaped from the cars, their firm voices echoing clear commands. The clearing was flooded with light and sound, the tension of battle giving way to the controlled order of a rescue operation. Mac rose, rifle still in hand, but the adrenaline beginning to recede. He saw Miller and Ramirez approaching the downed kidnappers, handcuffs in hand. He wasted no time, his gaze fixed on the torn tent where Rex was. He ran toward it, ignoring the agents passing him. As he approached, he saw Rex emerge from the tent, his protective body enveloping Sarah's small figure. The girl was trembling, but her arms were tightly clasped around Rex's neck. The dark glasses were still on her face, but she seemed less terrified now, nestled against the dog's warmth and security. "Sarah!" Mac called, his voice hoarse with emotion. Sarah turned at the sound of his voice. Letting out a small sound, Rex guided her to Mac, who knelt in the snow, extending his arms. Sarah let go of Rex for an instant and threw herself into Mac's arms, her small body trembling against his. Her sweet, childlike scent, which he had followed for so many miles, was now real and present in his arms. He held her tightly, feeling the warmth of her small, fragile body. Rex nestled beside them, licking Sarah's hand. The operation had been a success. The girl was safe. An FBI medic approached, his voice calm and professional. "Is she all right, sir? We need to check her over." Mac nodded, reluctant to let go of Sarah. He handed her over to the medic, who wrapped her in a thermal blanket, while other agents approached to assess the kidnappers and the camp. The snowstorm had subsided, leaving behind a heavy silence, broken only by the agents' voices and the crackle of radios. The clearing, once a stage of terror, was now a place of rescue and relief. Mac watched Sarah as she was examined, his heart still pounding. He turned to Rex, who sat patiently by his side, his eyes fixed on Sarah. "Good job, boy," Mac whispered, stroking the dog's head. Rex let out a low whine, a sign that the mission for him was complete. The girl was safe, and that was all that mattered. The medic, a middle-aged man with a neatly trimmed beard, spoke softly to Sarah, checking her vital signs as she remained wrapped in the thermal blanket. Mac watched closely, the tension in his shoulders beginning to dissipate, but still present. Sarah was pale, and the dark glasses still covered her eyes, but she was no longer crying. She held the rag doll firmly in one hand, and with the other, absently stroked Rex's fur, who lay at her feet, his eyes watchful. Miller approached Mac, his face serious but with a glint of relief in his eyes. "Good work, Mac. You saved the girl." Mac nodded, his gaze still on Sarah. "And the others?" "The bearded man and the thin one are injured, but alive. The woman surrendered. We're processing them now. The medical rescue team is en route to take them to the nearest hospital and then into custody. Ramirez is overseeing evidence collection. This place is a gold mine for us." Miller gestured toward the camp, now illuminated by the headlights of FBI vehicles and the flashlights of agents scouring every corner. The smell of gunpowder began to mingle with the aroma of diesel fuel and the frigid forest air. The wail of sirens had ceased, replaced by the murmur of voices and the crunch of boots in the snow. The storm had given a reprieve, and the sky began to lighten slightly on the eastern horizon, promising a cold, clear dawn. Mac felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Ramirez, her face smudged with snow and soot, but with a tired smile. "She's all right, Mac, thanks to you and Rex." He knelt to scratch Rex's ears, who wagged his tail once, softly. "Did they say anything?" Mac asked, his voice still.